So Vice President Pence, you have officially been in this race almost 2 months. What do you make of your campaign so far? How's it going?
We just couldn't be more encouraged at the outpouring of support at the Iowa State Fair over the last several days, and frankly, as we're traveling across all the early states and around the country. Look, I think the American people know that President Joe Biden has weakened this country at home and abroad. We've got to have change in the White House in 2024. But I also believe that more and more Republicans every day are recognizing that different times call for different leadership. The encouragement that we've received convinces me that we're going to have new leadership in the Republican Party as well. And we're going to continue to work our hearts out to earn the right to be that standard bearer and lead our party to victory, but more importantly, lead our country back to prosperity and security.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you say many times since you first announced that you were running that you did so after a lot of prayer and feeling like the Lord was leading you to. So I want to ask you, in the first few weeks of your campaign, what has the Lord been speaking to you, and how do you feel like God's been leading you?
I just, for us, everything begins with prayer. My wife and I try and spend a little time every day in prayer and in devotions together, and we're strengthened by that. But in a very real sense, the Scripture tells us over and over again that I'll be with you. Now, that doesn't promise victory. I understand that. I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And we felt God's grace from the very beginning of this campaign. And our goal is to run a campaign that honors God, that honors the values that we stood for throughout our career, but also one that really maybe begins the process of raising the threshold of civility in public life. Our country's facing real challenges. I mean, we have war raging in Eastern Europe. China's continuing to menace in the Asia Pacific. We have a national debt the size of our nation's economy for the first time since World War II. Our economy is struggling, families are hurting, rising energy prices, a crisis at our border, crime in our streets, and a steady assault on those of us that believe in traditional moral values and liberties and life. And I think now more than ever we need leadership that can speak to the broad mainstream of the American public, to talk about our values, but to talk in a way that might be possible for us to bring more Americans together to face these challenges. And that's the kind of campaign we're going to continue to run.
Mm-hmm. In 2016 and in 2020, there were many evangelical voters who told me that they were supporting President Trump's campaign because you were on the ticket. That's obviously not the case this election cycle, yet there are many evangelical voters who are still supporting Trump because they feel like he made them promises and he kept them. So what is your plan to win over those evangelical voters in this campaign?
Well, I'm very proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration. In 2016, Donald Trump promised to govern as a conservative. And many people thought when he selected me, someone who had been involved for my entire life in the conservative movement, that it was evidence of that. And we did just that for 4 years. We rebuilt our military, we cut taxes, we rolled back regulations, unleashed American energy, we secured our border, and we appointed conservatives to our courts at every level, including 3 of the justices that overturned Roe versus Wade and gave America a new beginning for life. But frankly, elections are about the future, and I'm running in part because my old running mate seems to be making no such pledge again. I see the president shying away from strong American leadership on the world stage. I see him literally blaming election defeats in 2022 on overturning Roe versus Wade and suggesting that abortion is now only a state issue. And then finally, Joe Biden's policy on our national debt is insolvency. He won't even talk about common sense reforms of our entitlement programs for younger Americans. And Donald Trump's position on entitlements is identical to Joe Biden's. And so I think the pathway forward for our country and for our party is to provide leadership that is grounded in those timeless conservative principles that have literally animated our movement over the last 50 years. A strong national defense, American leadership, fiscal responsibility, traditional values, and the right to life. And when I'm on that debate stage in Milwaukee, we're going to continue the conversation. And I hope people see me as the most consistent, proven conservative in this race.
Mm-hmm. And on the right to life, as president, what pro-life legislation would you like to see Congress pass and put on your desk for a signature?
Well, first let me say I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. I couldn't be more proud to have been a part of the administration that appointed 3 of the justices that sent Roe versus Wade to the ash heap of history and gave us a new beginning for life. But unfortunately, my former running mate and other candidates for the Republican nomination today are suggesting that the Supreme Court simply relegated the question of abortion to the states only. Well, my understanding is that the Supreme Court returned the question of abortion to the states and the American people. And while I strongly support efforts like here in Iowa to advance protections for the unborn, just as we did in the state of Indiana and other states around the country, it's important to remember the Supreme Court returned the question to the American people. And the American people elect presidents, they elect senators, they elect congressmen. And that's why, if I have the privilege of being president of the United States, people can be confident that just as I've been throughout my career, I'm going to be a champion for life in the Oval Office. And I believe the time has come for a minimum national standard, although I strongly support heartbeat legislation at 6 weeks, pain-capable legislation is closer to 15 weeks. But I think having a minimum national standard that would more align American law with other Western nations is an idea whose time has come, and it's supported by more than 70% of Americans. But we'll also make sure that we no taxpayer funding used for abortion at home and abroad. But at the end of the day, I think pro-life Americans want to know that after 2024, with a Republican in the White House, they're going to have somebody that's championing protections for the unborn at the state level and across the country, and I promise to do that.
Mm-hmm. Today's event was focused on education. This is a multifaceted issue that is likely going to be a key issue in 2024. You heard from Christian university presidents about some of their concerns, religious liberty. And then we also know, not even just in higher education, there are a lot of parents that are concerned about what their kids, the impact public schools are having on their kids, what they're learning, just different policies there. So as president, what would you plan, how would you address these issues and these concerns?
Well, I'm a strong supporter in educational choice, and I couldn't be more proud of the progress that's being made around the country. Look, parents don't co-parent with government, and we ought to empower parents across this country to choose where their children go to school, public, private, parochial, or homeschool. But also, as President of the United States, I promise to push back on this radical gender ideology that's taken hold in many of our schools, and it's so harmful to our children. And the foundation I created in Washington got involved in a federal lawsuit involving a school right here in Iowa, where literally you had to have a note from your parents to get a Tylenol, but you could get a gender transition plan from the health department at the Linn-Mar community schools without parental consent. You know, that's just not bad policy, that's crazy. And so defending the rights of parents to be in the lead in their children's education and empowering parents to choose schools that reflect their values is absolutely essential. But in the area of higher education, but also all of Christian education, I think the challenge today with a changing culture is to ensure that we are defending the right of religious education in America. The First Amendment protects the freedom of religion in this country. And as President of the United States, I'll be appointing judges to our courts at every level that'll uphold religious liberty and the right to live, to work, to worship, and to learn according to the dictates of our conscience.
You recently unveiled a new energy policy to make America one of the top energy producers by 2040. Mm-hmm. Why is this a key issue for you, and is your goal achievable?
Well, first, whatever the media is talking about, not on CBN, but elsewhere every day, what I hear as I'm traveling around Iowa and New Hampshire and across this country is that families are hurting. I mean, inflation has gone up 16.6% since the day we left office. The avalanche of spending out of the Biden administration launched the worst inflation in 40 years. But their war on energy has caused gasoline prices and energy prices to go through the roof. Gasoline today costs 60% more than it did the day we left office, and electricity rates are up 25%. That's why we unveiled a plan not only to deal with inflation broadly, but also to end the war on energy, to restore energy independence, which we achieved during the Trump-Pence administration. But also, I think the time has come for us to reclaim our role as the #1 energy producer in the world. China took that title in 2006, but I think with the right vision and the right leadership and all of the above energy strategy, by the year 2040, we can once again be the leading producer of energy on the planet. And in a very real sense, not only will our economy be more secure, but our security will be more secure as a result.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to ask you, right now, former President Trump, he has a historic lead in this GOP primary. What gives you hope that you or any of the other candidates can beat him to be the GOP nominee?
Well, I would tell you, I have great confidence in Republican primary voters. I mean, you look at the long history of the Iowa caucuses, which you know a little bit about in your family, and you look at the long history of early state voting. Republican primary voters have shaped the leadership of our party time and again in ways that has served the life of our nation well. And as I've traveled around, I'm convinced that it's early. I'm convinced that that voters in the early states are just now beginning to take a look. And one of the things I've realized is that I'm well known, but I don't think I'm known well. When people know me as that loyal vice president standing beside the president through a consequential administration, I was always loyal to President Donald Trump until my oath to the Constitution required me to do otherwise. But they may not know that I was a governor of a state that balanced budgets, cut taxes, had record employment, stood for the right to life, stood for educational choice for parents, and that also I was a conservative leader in the Congress. For many years, I battled the big spenders of my own party. And so my hope is, as we travel around, as people think about the challenges facing the country, and they look at which one of us has the most consistent conservative record, has the experience to be able to meet that moment, I'm confident we're going to have our opportunity.
And these past few days, as you've walked around the Iowa State Fair, I've seen just random people who call you a traitor, who believe that your actions on January 6th, that you were a traitor. So what is your response when you meet those people, to people who feel that way?
I always point to the Constitution of the United States. I remind people that when I became vice president, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And that 4 years later, I was faced with a choice. Whether or not I was going to oversee a session of Congress, preside, as the Constitution says, where the state's electoral votes that had been certified, had been reviewed in the courts, would be open and counted, as the Constitution says, or whether I would do as President Trump and several outside lawyers were arguing, and that is use my authority as vice president to overturn the election. I mean, the American people deserve to know that the president asked me to choose him over my oath to the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution, and I always will. And I must tell you, while I occasionally hear from detractors, my wife and I, once again this week at the Iowa State Fair, were deeply humbled how many people came up and thanked us for the stand we took that day. Even people of different political backgrounds and experiences. The Bible says he keeps his oath even when it hurts. And I know something about that. Remember, I was on the ballot. Mm-hmm. I understand the disappointment in the 2020 election. But I truly do believe that our country is more important than any one man. Our Constitution is more important than any one man's career. And as people consider us and consider the long sweep of our career, and they consider that fateful day, I hope they'll see that that I did my duty by God's grace that day to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And my final question for you, do you think we could see some convictions come from any of these indictments brought against your former running mate?
Well, I would leave that to the courts. I think the president is entitled to the presumption of innocence that every American is entitled to, and he should have his day in court. You know, particularly with regard to the recent indictment, I think I've been very clear. I hoped it hadn't come to that. I would have rather judgments about January 6th and his conduct on that day were left to the judgment of the American people. But we'll leave the judicial process to itself. But I'll always continue to make it clear to people that I believe by God's grace I did my duty that day. And I hope people even that have questions about that will take time to look, to reflect on our Constitution. And they'll see that if I have the great privilege of serving as President of the United States, I'll always keep my oath.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Vice President.
Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you.